everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, here at Check in my living room, thanks to Omicron, which, hey, maybe we're nearing the end of this wave. It's one of the things that we're going to be discussing this week as BC kind of plots its way maybe out of restrictions, a little bit slower than other provinces. Plus, we have a throne speech and Kevin Falcon elected BC Liberal leader. So a lot to discuss this week. Let's bring in the pod squad. You know them each and every week. Maclean K, Jillian Oliver, and Katy Merrifield are here. We're going to jump right into the throne speech. This is the speech from the throne to start the third session of the 42nd Parliament. It's filled with all sorts of pomp and pageantry, but I have to say, I didn't see a lot in here. It was particularly vague and unexciting, but let's go around and talk a bit about that. Maclean used to write throne speeches for a living under Christy Clark. You probably approach these things in a different way. What did you make of this?
Oh, I mean, I did other things.
No, that was
it.
Wrote throne speeches. That was it.
Once
a year, you had a job.
Now, I mean, if you, the viewer or the listener, did not see or hear the throne speech, don't worry, you are not the intended audience. The throne speech is written entirely for the MLAs in the chamber and the media, the press gallery. That's it. That is literally the sum total of everyone who pays attention to
Then why am I not satisfied is the question.
Because there's nothing in the throne speech. The throne speech used to, a long time ago, contain more or less detailed announcements of what the government was planning for the next few months. That's just not the case anymore. It's become a sort of vague, aspirational, we're great and we're going to do stuff speech every year. And we keep acting surprised that this is the case. This happened again this week. It was a speech that said, we're great and we're going to do stuff. And not a lot of details on what that stuff is. I mean, frankly, if you missed the throne speech, even if you were paid to watch the throne speech, you didn't miss anything.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's true. I was paid to watch a throne speech and I missed nothing. Jillian, what did you make of it?
I think Maclean's just mad he didn't write the only throne speech that matters, the 2017 BC Liberal clone speech, where they took all of the Green and NDP platform commitments and announced them in great detail.
It's true, I didn't write that, and no, I'm not. And yes, I am glad.
Yeah, I think, I mean, even though Maclean's right, they are usually very vague. This one was especially vague. Like, we usually get like maybe something about a new transit or infrastructure project or something like that sprinkled in, but there was nothing this week. I think the government is perhaps trying to save up some enthusiasm for the economic strategy that they're releasing next week. They've been sort of trying to hype that up and they, some announcements about sort of job training and these sorts of things. It's going to be really interesting to see what that looks like when it comes out, if it's really something that really puts this government's stamp on their vision for the economy, or if it's just sort of like little tweaks here and there, because I think it's been a long time coming and it sounds like something that they're really looking forward to being part of their brand.
Yeah, and part of the budget too, that big economic plan, I guess, is their vision to recovery and all of that. So you're right, I think that's a big focus. Katy, there's a long history in these throne speeches. They're supposed to be like tables of contents for the session, but most governments save all the goodies so they can announce them in the real world with validators and stakeholders and things like that. So I guess it's not a surprise maybe that there's nothing in here, but what did you come away with having seen and heard this?
Yeah, so throne speeches can come in many forms. In Alberta, Premier Jason Kenney sticks to a more traditional Westminster-style model, which is kind of a nonpartisan reading out of all the bills that the legislature can expect to see. Under Premier Gordon Campbell, we would often look to throne speeches for major policy shifts. And I would argue that under Premier Christy Clark, we're like heavy on narrative, a little bit more partisan. And in my view, the NDP have adopted a similar style. Now, when I was reading through it, though, I was actually going to comment on how the NDP had avoided any overtly political shots that you sometimes see embedded. But then I got to the housing section, and one of the lines was, after years where speculators and big developers were put before people, we are seeing signs of progress. So to kind of politically interpret that, that is a key indicator, in my view, that the NDP are going to try and deflect from their lackluster performance on the housing file and try to blame Kevin Falcon for the housing crisis. And so there was that line. We saw EB in question period kind of dismiss Kevin's election as, oh, you guys just elected a speculator as the head of your party. So you kind of see this attack narrative taking shape. it's a fairly ridiculous proposition at the policy level, but I would encourage the BC Liberals to really be smart about this and mount a pretty significant counterattack, because one thing that the NDP really excels at is deploying a very consistent and disciplined attack narrative on multiple platforms. So they would be wise to develop their counter messaging to that.
Yeah, it's certainly a kind of a double-edged sword for Falcon that he does have that experience in the private development company that he was part of, that he says is going to help him with real-world solutions to housing. But then on the other side, as you mentioned, David Eby at one point just flat out called him a speculator in the House. So it opens that back into that NDP narrative we've seen in 2 election campaigns of, the Liberals are doing this for themselves and the elite, and we're doing it for other people. So I'm sure that's going to come up, and they were ready for it. You're right, with lines like that. The thing that I found interesting about the throne speech was not even in the throne speech. It was a couple hours before the throne speech. Saskatchewan announced it was opening up its economy again, getting rid of its vax pass, moving to the end of masks. A couple hours after BC's throne speech, Alberta announced at midnight that night they were ending their vax pass. And that raises our second topic of this week, which is the pressure that is now on BC with other provinces moving more quickly. Premier Horgan said he's not influenced by protesters. He doesn't particularly care about honks from truckers outside the legislature. You can argue Alberta and Saskatchewan certainly are responding to that pressure. So just going around the table on that, I guess there is this pressure on BC. Does the insistence of sticking with Dr. Henry and the science model make a lot of sense, Jillian? And if so, how does the government kind of view all the pressure that's around it, do you think?
Well, I think it's funny, all along, every government, provincial government, has said that they're following the science. But in reality, I think it's been a mix of science and politics, and that's why you see different responses in every province. And to that point, the political situation in BC is very different. I've been a big critic of the decision to call a snap election, but I think this is an instance where it's good to have that behind us because the NDP government is not facing those kinds of pressures. The 3 provinces that we're seeing, really rapidly accelerate the removal of the restrictions are more conservative provinces where the restrictions are less popular. Both Premiers Scott Moe and Jason Kenney have very low approval ratings when it comes to the handling of COVID, and that's just not the case in BC. So I think the heat is just not on Horgan in the same way on this issue. That being said, I think that the conversation on a national level is starting to turn to the need to have a plan for removing these restrictions. They were never intended to be forever. And that's what we saw. We saw Dr. Henry say that next week we're going to get a roadmap for when we can expect these things to be lifted. That's a little bit more concrete because I think no matter where you fall, people are looking for some hope. They're looking for light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that's where we're going to see the government go next.
Yeah. Katy, what are the challenges for the government if it unveils this plan next week, as Jillian said, from Dr. Henry, and it's slower than other provinces? And it's citing the science on one hand, and the other provinces are citing different science, and we're just kind of behind. What would that do to government, do you think?
Yeah, there's no single data point that we can all collectively point to and say it's right. Look at what John Hopkins came out with a couple weeks ago, saying lockdowns have contributed to only a 0.2% reduction in deaths. There's a lot of conflicting evidence-based information out there. I said last week I don't think that BC will be as under as much political pressure as some other jurisdictions. However, if they don't lift restrictions by March 14th, BC will be an outlier because in addition to Alberta and Saskatchewan, Manitoba made that announcement. Doug Ford made that announcement this morning as well that they were going to be lifting. So there are going to be some political considerations to this decision. Where I get a little bit frustrated, and maybe it's just me, is that this government seems so intent in absolving itself of any responsibility over the management of this pandemic. The premier this week said, we are going to take both advice and direction from Dr. Henry on this. Well, advice is different than direction. Advice is guidance. Direction charts the course. And I would argue that elected officials need to be accountable for their decisions. But Dr. Bonnie Henry, as good as her strategy has been, she is not accountable to the citizens of British Columbia. And so I find it a little bit reprehensible that the government just continues to shovel off any responsibility to her. It's not right. Just because it's worked for them doesn't mean it's right.
It's an interesting point because you're right. It's the premiers of the other provinces that are coming out and saying, I've done a risk-based analysis between public health and getting back to normal. And I've made a decision as the head of your elected government that this is our path to normal. And we're not doing that here. John Horgan's saying, I'm going to leave it up to Dr. Henry. And it's that double-edged sword of, well, okay, so then the science is guiding us. But at the same time, if we're slow and out of step, where is the leadership on that, the political leadership? And you're right, the accountability to government. Maclean, adding in a complicating factor is you still have the armchair epidemiologists out there and other health officials saying, hang on, this is all too fast no matter what other provinces are doing. Look at our hospitalizations and all of that. So government's kind of hemmed in on all of that. What do you make of it?
I mean, in that respect, this debate is no different than public debates about everything from bike lanes to the price of gas to any issue under the sun. There will be armchair experts saying government's moving too fast, too slow, or shouldn't be moving at all. And so in that respect, COVID is actually becoming somewhat normal. And Katie's quite right to point out that, yeah, of course, that the government was quite happy to pat itself on the back in the snap election for its COVID management, and now it's kind of distancing itself from it. But the provincial government does have a responsibility to balance the risks from opening the economy back up with the real costs that no one disputes of public health restrictions, be they economic or mental health, or you can name it, going down the line. And so the province does have a tightrope to walk, and while it can ignore protesters and truckers, it can't well ignore, our partners in Confederation, what's happening south of the border. I realize we're taping this on Vancouver Island, but BC cannot become an island.
Yeah, and other parts of the province still have different restrictions, so it's for sure. We'll see where Dr. Henry, what she announces next week. If BC remains at a step, that's going to be a political challenge, I think, for the government to tackle going forward. We want to move on to the issue of Kevin Falcon winning the BC Liberal leadership debate. We talked about it for weeks. It's happened now. Katy, tell us how he won based on your kind of reading of this.
Yeah, so despite a very bizarre narrative that's being hawked by some folks in the media and elsewhere, that Kevin barely won, he won decisively. And the riding by riding data that was released this week proves it. I would encourage everybody to look at Jordan Bateman's piece in the Orca. He does a fantastic job breaking down the results. So I will just take credit for his work right now and share some highlights with you. First and foremost, 47% on a first ballot is the most impressive showing since Gordon Campbell won leadership in 1993. Back in 2018, Andrew won, but his first ballot showing was just shy of 20%. In Christy Clark's leadership race in 2011, she had 38%. So Kevin's 47 is tremendous. On the first ballot as well, Kevin led in 62 of 87 ridings. Ellis Ross, his closest competitor, led in 21, so significant difference there as well. Kevin also dominated in Surrey, Langley, Richmond, Abbotsford, Chilliwack, and Maple Ridge. This is very significant because these are battlegrounds that the BC Liberals have to get back in the next election. And finally, in just 2 of the ridings did Kevin even finish past second place. He was first or second in 85 of the 87 ridings on the first ballot. This was an incredibly decisive victory. Yeah,
I don't subscribe to the argument that he barely won either. I think that was pretty, watching the other leadership races over time, that was a pretty, you're right, decisive victory, I think. But nonetheless, it looks a little confusing, I guess, because if you just looked at the fifth ballot, you would look at Ellis Ross with 30% of the vote and you would go, oh, well, I guess that was close. But that's not how the voting system worked at all. So some people, I think, missed that context. Jillian, not only did he win, but Andrew Wilkinson announced he's going to resign to open up a by-election in Vancouver-Colchena, which is a safe seat. And Falcon sort of presided over a week of activity here at the legislature, even though he doesn't actually have a seat. How did that all look to you?
Yeah, I think that it was, you could definitely feel Falcon's energy coming off of that win. I think that he had a stronger, more coherent message than anything we've seen from the Liberals in the last 5 years. Much stronger and clearer on framing the NDP. His message is, the NDP have failed to get anything big built, suggesting that he's going to be running on his record on building infrastructure, things like the Port Mann Bridge. And I think, it shows that he's actually, despite all of the attacks, both from the other candidates and from the NDP, which have been, relentless from the moment that he was announced as the winner. We had NDP ministers on Twitter tweeting out all manner of attacks. I think it shows that he's going to be a really strong campaigner, and it's going to be, I think it's going to sort of energize BC politics in general over the next couple of years.
Yeah. Maclean, what do you think of how he's done in the first kind of week and the challenges ahead?
I think he actually had a very good week. Jillian is quite right to point out that he was a noticeable presence in the legislature, despite obviously not having a seat. And there's a pretty clear path towards him getting one, at least within the next 6 months, hopefully sooner if the by-election can be called. And also that Katy is right to point out that the NDP have been running against Kevin Falcon for the better part of a year already. And so it feels very sort of continuous in a lot of respects. It feels like he's been the leader for quite some time, if only because he has continued to receive a lot of outsized attention in terms of attack ads. And it's really, in some respects, last weekend kind of felt sort of inevitable in that he was already being attacked. He was already being treated as the leader in waiting, and now he's just the leader. The only thing he's waiting for is a seat.
Mm-hmm. Here's where I think he may run into some trouble here. I've listened to his sort of messaging on childcare and on housing, two kind of big files. And I know it is the core philosophy of the BC Liberals to believe in the free market and the private sector will rise all boats if the government gets out of the way. But I'm not sure the public is quite there on housing and on childcare, where the private sector's left a lot of people behind. And if I'm kind of waiting for some more details on what his solutions are on those files, other than free up red tape for developers to build more supply and incentivize private childcare operators to build more supply. If that's it, you're going to go up against an NDP government that very much in 2017 promises more. It promises to intervene in files that are big in people's lives and help them. And that, I think, is still a powerful message that I'm not totally sure where Falcon's going to land on that. But just listening to him so far, I think he should be aware of that for sure, because I know that's the kind of a core of the Liberals, but I don't know if the public's there. I'm not sure that the public kind of believes that, we just help some childcare operators make some more spaces and bada bing, bada boom, we solve the problem. The fees go down, the spaces go up, got more condos over here, everybody's happy. No, that doesn't work. It hasn't worked. Anyways, that's my worry about Falcon, is I'm not sure where he is on that. So I'm watching to see. We got a little bit of time here. We got about a few minutes. Why don't we do a grab bag and go around? Because there was a lot of other stuff this week. Maclean, you were watching Lisa Baer get into some trouble on FOI misdirection of the House. Just quickly walk us through that.
Yeah, I mean, Adam Olsen, the Green MLA, raised a point of privilege, accusing the minister of intentionally misleading the House, which is as grave an offense as you can have as a minister. And the paper trail is pretty damning, to be honest. She said that there was no fee. She was continuing to listen. And then moments after the House rose in the last session, signed an order saying it was $10. And in fact, there were emails with decision notes saying the fee is going to be set. Baer's defense is that the decision note was just an interim decision note and thus not really a decision note. We'll get a ruling on this hopefully Monday from the Speaker, who is unlikely to punish the minister, if only because they're both in the NDP. But, I mean, anyone watching this would be hard-pressed to say that there wasn't at least some misleading going on, whether intentional or not.
Yeah,
I
think
what is an interim decision note? I have literally never heard of that before. It has decision in it for, I was going to swear, reason.
Yeah. No, I mean, the path is pretty clear. There was a decision made on a fee, was signed, went to Treasury Board. I mean, that is a decision. It's just that she's arguing that the decision didn't actually happen until she signed the cabinet order.
There is no such thing as a government decision that is not a decision
exactly.
Once it's on paper.
Hey, we got another visitor on the pod show.
I'm surprised it only took a year for this to happen. This is Eric. Can you say hi to the people of Vancouver Island, Eric?
Hi, Eric. Welcome to Czech.
Instantly,
the ratings just shot through the roof. Jillian, can you still do a long and detailed description of the oil and gas royalty review regime with Eric there?
Hi, because it's very important. The NDP has been trying to square the circle around justifying why it has been, justifying why it's been.
That's how I feel about the royalty regime industry, as well.
While also trying to be a climate leader. So in this effort, they have, launched a review that came back very critical of the regime, and then they've sent this out for public comment. They got the feedback back, and it was similarly quite damning. I encourage anyone who cares about this issue to take a look through it, because it's going to be a really interesting thing to watch, to see. I think it's a really important litmus test of how serious the government is about furthering climate action and not just greenwashing it.
I am amazed you pulled
that
segment off. Way to go. Way to go. That full marks as a gold star on that. Katie, what quickly on your topic, what jumped out at you for the last week?
I just want to bring it back to, I had written an article for the Orca on unity and how important that was for the BC Liberals. And so I just wanted to quickly evaluate Kevin since winning the leadership race. And I would say he did exactly what I expected in order to ensure that we are a united coalition. His message was one of collaboration and unity from the stage at the BC Liberal Convention. He appointed very substantial critic roles to his competitors, and he also appointed Todd Stone as his House leader, which I think is just going to be such a powerful and unifying voice for Kevin as we march forward towards the next election. So I think Kevin did a great job on the unity file.
He did reshuffle all his critics and all of that. So, yeah, there was a giving his leadership rivals positions in his caucus was a good idea. It's something leaders of all parties try to do after they have a race. Thank you for watching and listening this week. If you're watching on Check TV, make sure you stick around for This is Van Colour with Mo Meir coming up next, where he's also got a take on the BC Liberal leadership race. Make sure you subscribe to Political Capital. We will be back next week. Thanks for watching.